That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, bringing you another free agency preview with Tee Higgins. Here to break down where Tee Higgins might go, what's next for Higgins and the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's throw it to Derek first. Derek, tell us your thoughts. Is Tee Higgins leaving, or is he staying in Cincinnati in 2024?
Yeah, I really see him moving on from the Bengals. He's right now he just finished up a 4-year, $8.5 million contract. So his AAR about 2.2. I think he's going to be very affordable for a lot of teams who are looking for either an upgrade in their wide receiver 2 position, or I don't see him as a wide receiver 1, so he's not going to get the big money, but he should have an affordable asking price, and I think he'll be an upgrade for a number of teams that are looking for a little more athleticism, maybe try to get a little younger, for their number 2 position. So I think he fits really well with a lot of teams, and I see him moving on.
Now, Sky, you had a pretty interesting take when it comes to Tee Higgins. You actually think something else is going to happen. Break down what your thoughts are on the situation. Do you think Tee Higgins stays or goes, or do they prioritize another wide receiver free agent in Cincinnati?
Yeah, well, we also have Tyler Boyd here to talk about. And obviously, Jamar Chase is number 1. Tee Higgins, when he's right, is a 1B. I don't even think he's a number 2. This is kind of like Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones a couple years ago, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, maybe Brandon Ayuk and Debo, depending how you think about them, whatever. Basically, they have 2 number 1 wide receivers. One guy is the number 1 for that particular team, but Tee Higgins would be a number 1 on 25 of the other 32 teams in the NFL, in my opinion. So I think Tee Higgins does leave. Is that bona fide number 1 there? And I think Tyler Boyd is the one that stays. I'll talk about him in a second. But Tee Higgins leaves, in my opinion. Tee Higgins goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Few things here. They need a bona fide number 1. They tried Calvin Ridley. He was out a year and a half for the gambling thing, sports betting, whatever. Came back a little bit rusty. He actually was on fire the first week of the season. Then he kind of was sporadic. But Christian Kirk went down. Zay Jones didn't really work out. So they need a bona fide number 1. Also, let's flash it back, folks. I love my Alabama running backs. The only thing I love more than that is Clemson wide receivers. Love Clemson wide receivers. 25 touchdowns and 2,000 yards in 2 years playing together at Clemson for Tee Higgins and Trevor Lawrence. Bringing that into the NFL now. He is the number 1. They could use that there, really help them in that division to put them over the top. For me, this is a no-brainer, assuming he leaves, to go to Jacksonville.
This is another key part of this whole situation, is that Joe Burrow did kind of delay his big time cap hit. He only accounts for $29 million this year, which for quarterbacks is absurd, especially of his caliber. And then in next year he hits for 40. Yeah. And then next year he hits for 49. The other problem is Jamar Chase is also in line for a monster payday. His base salary this year is $1 million. Yeah, I think Jamar Chase might be making a lot more. He still makes about it's actually 9.8 his cap hit this season, but that's going to be $25 million just as soon as next year. So I do think the Bengals do have a window here to kind of address some of the cap thing. They can kind of front some of Tee Higgins' money that where they can keep him, give him the money up front, and then his cap hit could be lower moving forward once those other guys hit the books. But I do think there's one interesting caveat here that makes things a little interesting, is that Brian Callahan, longtime offensive coordinator for this team, is now the head coach of the Titans, a team, by the way, who has a young quarterback that really needs an alpha number 1 wide receiver that is more on his timeline. I love DeAndre Hopkins. He's no longer in his prime. If Will Levis is going to be your guy, wouldn't you want to bring in a more established number 1 wide receiver that's more on his timeline? I think Tee Higgins makes a ton of sense, even if it's a franchise tag and trade situation, and then also incorporate Sky, re-signing Tyler Boyd. It works for all parties because in theory, the Bengals will get another trade asset. They can find a younger receiver, maybe to put on a lower salary cap hit. And then at the same time, the Titans now go reunite him with Brian Callahan. He knows the system. He'll be able to hit the ground running. And that gives Will Levis the perfect prototype of wide receiver that he needs in this offense with Brian Callahan. But, other than that, is there Derek, I guess from your standpoint, outside of this situation, what's your kind of thoughts if he does leave? If Tee Higgins goes, Is Jamar Chase finally going to hit that number 1 overall receiver potential? Does there a sleeper, maybe a tight end come in and kind of fill a void? Does Tyler Boyd, if he resigns, become on your radar? What's your thoughts about Burrow? Kind of what's the impact if he does leave in free agency?
Yeah. So I think the Bengals still need, I mean, whether they bring back Tyler Boyd or not, they need someone to complement Jamar Chase. And it's not going to be Tee Higgins to me. And, even if Tyler Boyd comes back, I still think they need more than that. We've talked about a number of other ways.
You don't love Trenton Irwin? That doesn't get you going right now? Some Trenton Irwin,
Not
Charlie
really,
Jones?
no,
All right.
not really. But, and other shows we've talked about, someone like Darnell Mooney going to the Chiefs. Well, I think he would be a really good fit with Cincinnati as a, complement to Jamar Chase. Someone of that ilk coming into, again, play opposite of Chase. I think that would be a really good fit for the Bengals. I think that I think they move on from Higgins. What I differ, I think, from you guys as it shows, I just don't think he's a number 1 receiver. I mean, he has 2 seasons with his high of 74 receiving yards, and he's barely cracked 1,000 yards twice. But again, that to me, that is not wide receiver 1 money. So I like the idea, like you said, of him going to Tennessee. I think that makes a lot of sense. But as the number 1, boy, that really scares me. I just don't see teams throwing a lot of money at him. And, frankly, I could see a situation with Higgins. If that's what he's waiting for and it doesn't come right away, he might be on the market for a while, watching a lot of these other guys sign, and then his opportunities are going to shrink, and he might have to sign for something a little bit less, or maybe, a position that's just not ideal for what he wants. But I just don't see him as a number 1. And if some team is going to sign him as a number 1, I think that's going to be a mistake.
Sky, speak some common sense into this man. Come on.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to. First of all, Derek, let's remember last year, and over the last couple of seasons, various teams, various wide receivers. But if we remember correctly, Nelson Aguilar got the absolute bag from New England, right? Like shook the fantasy industry, getting super paid from New England, didn't do anything. We've also had a number of other wide receivers. Last year, the first wide receiver to go and to really make a big splash, solid player, not a bona fide number 1. Christian Kirk, of all the other wide receivers available last year, he was the one to go, get paid, become the number 1. And then they also had Calvin Ridley, who was another kind of number 1. I hear you. I mean, the numbers don't lie. The numbers are the numbers, but he's been playing as a number 2 for the most part because Jamar Chase is that number 1. And just in human relations, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are besties from college. Like, you can't change that kind of stuff. That's why I think Jacksonville makes so much sense for Tee Higgins to go back with Trevor Lawrence, because that mesh mold makes a lot of sense. On top of that, Bob had a deep dive. I'm going to go a little bit deeper on the Tennessee connection. Did you know that Tee Higgins is actually a 5-star recruit out of high school, went to Clemson, but from Tennessee originally? So he might want to just go home there. You know what I mean? So not a bad choice there, Bob, as well. Certainly not a contender by any means, but could be another building block. Tyler Boyd for me is the interesting piece here. I think he's a solid number 2 for most of the teams. He's been a number 3 in Cincinnati for a number of years, even with AJ Brown, AJ Green. Gotta get my colors correct here. The Cowboys could use a nice slot receiver because CeeDee Lamb is not that guy anymore. He's everything. So they could use a nice slot guy over the middle. The Steelers could use what Juju used to be. They could get him back because now they got 2 good guys, Johnson and they have the outside covered, but they don't have the slot covered in Pittsburgh. Also, another connection, Tyler Boyd went to Pitt as well in college, so you can make a nice link there. So Tyler Boyd for me is the one that's going to stay. That's just the reports I've been hearing. He's cheaper, he's easy, whatever. And then Tee Higgins, I think, is going to go get paid elsewhere, become a true number 1. Derek, I'll just call it right now. He goes well over 1,000 yards as the number 1 wherever he lands, and 74 receptions. Mike Evans is only at 79. You know what I mean? So like some of these guys with the ADOT doesn't necessarily have to have the volume if they have the efficiency And I do think that Tee Higgins can be a number one. He just hasn't had to be yet.
All right, I'm starting to write my bust for next year. I'm starting to pen that article right now, and
Fair.
if Tee Higgins is a number one, that might be my underachiever of the year.
I gotta. So when you're looking at this kind of situation too, it just seems like with Burrow, it all starts and stops with Burrow, and Burrow has not stayed healthy the last 2 seasons, and the way they situated the money, they clearly had an idea in mind. Like this season, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow account for $38 million. In next year, that number is probably going to go up maybe double. Like it could be double. And so this is a window where they can now spend on a premier wide receiver. There isn't a number, like you can say Mike Evans. I do believe Mike Evans is better, but their win now. The Bengals are the one team in the AFC that can say we can go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs and beat them in the playoffs. No other team can say that. So if Joe Burrow stays on the field, they are immediately a contender for the Super Bowl. So I don't think you just really just get rid of Tee Higgins and replace him with younger guys. This is your time. So I think he does come back for that reason. It just would be weird that they situated the money, push Joe Burrow's extension, the big hit until 1 year away, and they don't bring Tee Higgins back. I think Tyler Boyd, it just seems weird. Like if you look at the numbers, there were so many opportunities over the last year or two. Listen, Higgins and Chase have not stayed on the field either. It's like the freaking Bengals can't stay healthy. So Boyd is at a lot. Boyd doesn't miss games. And like, if you look at the games with and without Jamar, he doesn't blow up that much. He didn't emerge as the alpha. There was games where, Trenton Irwin got some looks. And then a guy that I really like in Dynasty that I'm willing to throw a 3rd round pick to just to see how this situation shakes out is that Andre Ilovazovic. I can't even say his name, but he showed some flashes late, the rookie last year. If Tee Higgins does walk, he's a guy that I think is a deeper name to watch. But let's get the final count here, guys. Final stake down. Where is he going? Derek, I'll go to you first. Tee Higgins, staying or going? If he goes, where is he going?
Yeah, he leaves, and I like. I'm going to steal, Sky's recommendation. I like him in Jacksonville. He'll probably be the number one, which I disagree with, but I do like him in that position. So I say he leaves and he ends up in Jacksonville.
Yep, in Jacksonville as well, over 1,000 yards.
I want to say Titans. I think he comes back, but just for the fun, let's have a little fun. I'm going to say he gets traded, franchise tag, and traded to the Tennessee Titans, reunites with Brian, goes home. Head home, T. Have a good time, be the alpha, and be a bust in Derek's article. All right, that's all we got here, folks. This is the free agency preview for Tee Higgins. Make sure you check out our other video content that we have on the channel. We also talked about Mike Evans, and we also had a full free agency preview on Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you go over to razzball.com and check all the great articles for baseball, basketball, hockey, and more, and of course, football, folks. And check us out on IG and TikTok, and go check out the podcast side, the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for my co-host once again. Go follow Derek_Favorite on Twitter and Sky Gawasco and myself at Bobby Lamarco. Thank you for joining us again.